Peter, I'm going to start off with you. Looking at the structural framework of the Abu Dhabi Plan 2030, what are the key elements of this plan, and what is Abu Dhabi looking to develop, and how and why as well?
I think it's start by looking at the whole process, where you have all of these three plans under the Estadama banner, sustainability, which isn't just about the urban framework, it's about the economics and the environmental plans as well. But focusing on the urban plan, it came into place in 2007, and it was there to identify areas of development and a means of developing Abu Dhabi in that sustainable fashion to support business primarily, and to support the jobs and so forth that were being created. That's subsequently been reviewed and revised, and I think the important thing to say about it is that it is an evolving plan. The world that we live in 2019 is very different to the world in 2007, and so the original development plan, with its proposed areas for office space, for residential, for industrial, has had to be revised quite significantly in certain areas, and also it's been refined backwards, reduced in certain areas to make sure that we don't overbuild. We've long talked about oversupply in the market, so that's been revised. But ultimately that plan is there to put controls in place to optimize the development of the real estate sector in Abu Dhabi.
And of course, looking at sort of, there's a particular aspect to the design elements of it as well, and from an urban planning perspective, what does this plan look at from, say, from the transport side of things, from the sustainability side, and also to make the plan future-proof, to look after next generations? Nigel, I think maybe...
Oh, yeah, sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah, I think as Peter said, I mean, I think if you sort of picture it, you've got there's the 2030 plan, which is sort of forms the main sort of umbrella document, if you like. And as Peter's mentioned, I mean, that document, acknowledges that there always needs to be this calibration between supply and demand, and that's exactly what's happening at the moment. So sort of phases like the big capital district area, there was that was something that was considered very viable, 2007. Pre-crashes now, those sort of elements of that get toned down. But I think within that document, then there's a whole sort of suite of other supporting documents. The PRDM, Public Realm Design Manual, for example, the Urban Street Design Manual, USDM, Estadama, as Peter's mentioned. I mean, there's even, I think it's UCDM, the Utility Corridor Design Manual. There's a whole suite of documents that sit under that, that talk to each other, and are all there to move Abu Dhabi towards being, a global city that talks to great design. And they are a great suite of documents. I mean, you only need to look at the reference pages in those documents to see the sort of legislation globally that's being referred to putting those documents together, for whether it be the US, Australia, UK, Europe, the best of the best elements from those cities pulled together to formulate those documents. So the 2030 plan and the other suite of documents that sit within that plan are let's say, a great baseline from which the city works towards in implementing design strategies. And the range of strategies is from the upgrading of existing facilities and streets and footpaths and cycle networks and all of those things, right the way through to key strategic districts within the city. So yeah, that's sort of there's some very good material there from a design perspective that we can refer to as a baseline, and which UPC, or rather DPM now, uses to refer to.
Great. And Dr. Mubarak, looking at these plans, where do you see the role of the public and private entities in helping develop the new urban landscape of Abu Dhabi?
Yes, please. Good morning, everybody. When we speak about Abu Dhabi, and to achieve that vision, or let's say to develop itself to compete with the other markets. Abu Dhabi has the vision. Abu Dhabi has the capacity from every aspect. Abu Dhabi has also the wealth to achieve what's planned for. So the collaboration between the two sectors is very crucial in the vision of 2030. And the government put the trust in this private sector to play as a role in a way it helps both parties. So Abu Dhabi has this vision and has the way to do it. So, and Abu Dhabi also, one of the city has the financial capacity to achieve it. So I assume there is a lot of collaboration will happen now and the future to achieve this vision.
Great. Nigel, you mentioned the public realm design document within there, and of course you're at IMCAN and you've got quite a significant and relatively unique project going on. These whole set of documents also look to future-proof Abu Dhabi. In terms of the project that you're doing, or in general, where are you seeing, how does this cater to sort of the multi-generational and depth in diversity we have here? How do these type of projects suit to Abu Dhabi's demographics?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that as I said, the suite of documents is a fantastic suite of documents, but ultimately it's a baseline. You need to, certainly what we're trying to do at IMCAN is to push the boat even further. And your original question a moment ago to Dr. Mubarak about the public and the private sector, I think we strongly believe that beyond those documents, there needs to be the creative endeavours of the private sector as well, in addition to the sort of mandated or regulatory framework. And that's down to the teams within those private development teams, but then also the consultants that we curate in helping to pull together the projects. And I think there's so much more beyond just the information within the PRDM or the USDM or whatever it may be. I think if you were purely just to implement the measures in those and draw the line there, you'd have a great city, but it might be, it could be so much more. And I think that's where you need the creative endeavours of the other teams, the private sectors and the consultants. And we're strong believers in the model of mixed use, high density developments. And we're strong believers in the power of the public realm, the power of the spaces in between buildings, and that's where life happens. And I think when you curate the right consultant teams, the way that the buildings then start to talk to that public realm is a really unique proposition. And it goes beyond what you might see in a typical affection plan, with a tower on a podium or whatever it might be. You start to find that the architecture is as well starting to give something back to the public realm, and it becomes a really exciting ingredient. So, we're trying to sort of push all of those dynamics of Makers District, for example, on Reem Island, push for that sustainable model, which is not just for Abu Dhabi, it's a global model. I mean, for the sake of planet Earth, we need dense mixed-use developments. We don't need urban sprawl where people have to commute for 2 hours in a traffic jam to move from a residential suburb to a central business district. You need these mixed-use developments. It's a sustainable model. So.
And thank you for mentioning urban sprawl. If you read these documents, one of the things that it really looks to avoid is actually creating an urban sprawl, because that effectively takes away value from a lot of land. And on the sustainability side of things, one of the things that these frameworks look at are the transport oriented developments, and also the public transport which could be coming out. Now, Peter, looking at transport oriented development, first of all, one, the requirement of it to cater to the various different income groups, and secondly, what value do you think that developers can capture through a TOD?
It's about creating those clusters around the transport, and it's those transport nodes that need to be created first and foremost. And actually in Abu Dhabi, we're still light on that. We have metros in the plan, we have LRTs in the plan, but they're yet to be created. But as Nigel was saying, around these nodes, you're trying to put in as much residential, business space, leisure space as possible, so that you create that live, work, play environment where you don't lose the money to other products. If you look at the Abu Dhabi market, one of the things that we've been seeing for many years is the loss of retail spend up the road, particularly. With those TODs, you're trying to capture that within the immediate environment, and then sure, it feeds into the wider master plan of Abu Dhabi. But when you create a hub like that, to a certain extent, you saw it in some of the older buildings in Abu Dhabi and the performance of those buildings over the last few years, where you had these little clusters of communities. You had the same people from the same backgrounds working in the area, living in the area, and spending downstairs. I mean, there are amazing clusters on Hamdan Street where the retail rents are some of the highest in the marketplace. And so that's the value you can see generated around those transport nodes when they're created.
And do you think, what do you think is the best potential form? I know putting your spot on here, but is it from the light rail side of things, or do we need to do something different to what we're seeing in the region? And there is quite a lot of development going in the region around this sort of particular subject.
If you look up the road to Dubai, there have been lots of studies around the metro stations and linking those into the surrounding areas. I would say that they probably haven't yet been as successful as they might have been. But that system, and it looks as though Abu Dhabi's transport network will come into an environment which is slightly depressed in economic terms. Although as government spending filters through, hopefully that will improve. There is certainly value to be created there.
Great. Dr. Mubarak, in terms of this particular framework, going forward and in terms of implementation, do you think it's best led by a regulation model which is 100% controlled by the government, or the inclusion of the private sector, or should there be just basic guidelines, as Nigel mentioned earlier, and then that offers flexibility? What are your views on this?
I think Abu Dhabi is believing in the role of private sector, and the government also is very crucial, it plays a very crucial role. So it's a combination of two complementary roles. Each one plays its role. And the government of Abu Dhabi also is going back. It's in very nice situation financially. So it could participate also in developing a lot of things. And let also the private sector to play its role. And so it's a combination of two things.
Okay, brilliant. And from a legislative, and this is an open question to the panel, from a global perspective, what are some of the best practices that we're seeing, and how could we learn and maybe adapt a local fit for those particular best practices?
I think it's important to have a strong planning authority. It has evolved, and the 2030 plan has been a core part of that. Yes, all of the points we touched on earlier around design guidelines are important, but the strength of the planning authority on a development by development basis is absolutely imperative. In the past, you've had various different government entities granting planning consents. That's been pulled back into one through DPM. So acting in that regard is very strong, because otherwise you give people too much freedom. We've touched on the urban sprawl, but a lot about that 2014 revision of the 2030 plan was about stopping that urban sprawl and ensuring that there was redevelopment of downtown areas and so forth. Another more recent announcement was around enforcing the protection of buildings, regenerating those buildings, making sure they don't fall into too much disrepair in downtown areas. It's not exactly great for the streetscape walking down some of the older parts of Abu Dhabi. Now government is taking action and enforcing owners to superficially regenerate to improve those streetscapes. So there's certainly an important role to play.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to that. I'm just picking up on that last point there. Excuse me, about the regeneration. I mean, just as a small aside, I think there's some amazing opportunities on Abu Dhabi Island for taking some of these sort of super blocks and you know, using them as case studies of how you can create a community sort of walkable development in a city centre location. Of relative high density, and just taking a holistic view on one of those blocks rather than sort of do more of a superficial facelift of those blocks and you know, fixing the streets. It would be really nice to take one of those super blocks and actually just redo it, regenerate it into as a case study for a mixed use block. And I think you know, community is a huge thing. It's a huge thing, and we're striving to create these sort of soulful communities. And you know, when you're living in sort of disparate blocks that don't sort of talk to each other or don't have a common shared space, it's very hard to get that sense of community and that sense of belonging. And I think there's some really interesting studies that can be made for creating these communities of, say, up to 500 people typically, where you can get to know people in that district or that area. So yeah, that's an interesting point with the regeneration. I mean, it's a huge topic, lots of opportunities.
And sorry, please.
And historically, Abu Dhabi took care of a lot of about the landscape.
Yes.
And at one point of time, they call it the city of gardens.
Yes.
So historically, also they have this notion of taking care of landscape and the community living.
Yes. Well, the Medina. I mean, the Medina is it's a historic model for this region, which
and
a beautiful model that worked.
And the 80s, they used to call it Manhattan of the Gulf.
Right.
So even before there was a good story that should continue.
Yes. Indeed.
And on a global level, crassly talking about it from a financial perspective as well, and sort of looking at valuations elements, those communities which do offer that mixed-use element, the smaller community malls and so on, they tend to hold their value a lot better and a lot longer, and actually a lot more, I guess, of interest to end investors as well, which helps you actually offload those assets should you decide to do so and move on and develop something else. So I think it's incredibly important that we get these particular elements right. Dr. Mubarak, using this next phase of urban development in a potential time period where the city's population could go up to 3 million people over the next sort of 10 years and so on, how can we use real estate to support the economy of Abu Dhabi, and how can we use it sustainably given what we've seen regionally?
Real estate and construction represent a big portion of Abu Dhabi economy. So it's play a very important role to provide residence, offices, retail, every type of real estate. So it's very crucial role to the property in everybody's life. And I think, can you repeat the question?
So how do we use real estate to support Abu Dhabi's economy in the next 10 years?
Abu Dhabi, I think it put a lot of emphasis in real estate. Even like it used to provide residence to visit locals. And at one point of time, they provide finance also if you have like commercial land to build it. So Abu Dhabi from the beginning, it know the importance of housing, know the importance of develop properties in general. So it's very crucial to have nice planned city. It has every type of properties. So it plays a very important role in everybody's life. And for any city also, the properties and developing nice buildings, nice neighborhoods, it's very crucial to even for our own daily life.
So it's having a supporting role to attract the right individuals, attract the right caliber of talent to, want to be here, and then use that as a stepping stone from there to develop forward?
I think now, the quality of building in Abu Dhabi in general, it's up to a good standard, let's say. And a lot of it also super standard. And I think a lot of visitors, whoever visit Abu Dhabi, they feel it's a nice place to live in. And even at one point of time, they take care even of this building to represent a certain culture, which is local culture. So there is even the building also play a role in the culture aspect. So when you visit Abu Dhabi, you feel it's a little bit traditional type of buildings, and even in the towers, let's say, it has some touch of Arabic culture. So building, it plays more than a role of a building. It's part of a culture, and it's part of the living of people. So it's very, very crucial. And even they used to have like the Department of Public Works. They used to build everything, like schools, housing, hospitals. And as you said before now, the private also, the private sector, they give it a bigger role. Now we will see a lot of private schools, not as before. Now we will see more private hospitals, private universities, and also a lot of private now housing doing by the developers. So you will, if you go historically, you will see there is a shift from the government doing everything in real estate, and now it gives a lot of role to the private sector to do its role. And I think that will be the notion for the future, to have like combination between public and private roles. Perfect.
Peter, from your side of things and looking at it from your valuations background, what are the factors that we need to consider for investors to want to be here for the long run?
Well, real estate is certainly a popular asset class in the Middle East and in Abu Dhabi. All of the local families have got plenty of it. We've seen laws introduced earlier this year to allow freehold in investment areas for expatriates, which is a step in the right direction. But I'd step back and just say that real estate has to serve business. It has to serve the needs of the population. And so developers really need to focus on what is required at the moment. There's a healthy supply of residential, healthy supply of commercial and retail. So Dr. Mubarak touched on it, but it's about generating those jobs. And that's why it's so important to look at this urban planning framework in the context of the economic vision as well, which talks about developing areas of expertise within the UAE in aviation, healthcare, of course the oil and gas sectors and so forth. But really the real estate side of it needs to support that business. The role of the planning authority is to control development. So there's not too much speculation on real estate as we saw 10, 12 years ago. But going forward to keep a tight rein on it. In terms of making it attractive to investment, the nature of investment is that it implies a return is being sought. Land values in Abu Dhabi remain fairly full, given the risks of development in the supply-demand scenario. So again, the role of the planning authority to control the release of supply, to allow there to be some fat for developers to make some profit to be made, in order to get people interested in the marketplace.
Great. Nigel, we're talking about plans here which are sort of 10, 15 years and so on. From your perspective, from a design side of things, how do we ensure that they actually will be relevant? You know, tastes today are changing so much faster. You know, you've got millennials, but also whether you're local population or your expat populations, there's a change in taste. How do we ensure that these developments that we're doing today cater to today's millennial population, for example, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, good question. I think you know, a lot of it is down to good design and I suppose flexible design to a degree. But I think, you know, without wanting to harp on too much about mixed use, community, walkable developments, and all of that, I think that's why that model is a sustainable model, because it is a very flexible model. And yes, within the different sectors of, you know, residential, for example, there are other typologies that sort of come to the surface. For example, co-living. The co-living typology at the moment in residential is becoming something of interest. Those type of products may ultimately appeal to millennials, for example. I think it's important to develop communities which don't just appeal to millennials, but just appeal to everybody across the board. And if you are in a development which satisfies the needs of a whole demographic of people, and when we say sort of mixed use, I mean, we're not just talking about, but we're talking about sort of the demographic and the age range and everything within that sort of even the residential component. I think if you can provide developments that are appealing to everybody, they become sustainable, and they're appealing not just to families with children, but they're appealing to millennials as well. There is, you know, for example, you provide a flexibility of office space within that development, and it's not about having a tower with huge floor plates that a young startup or entrepreneur can't get their hands on. It's about providing smaller opportunities to get smaller office space within that development, not needing a car to leave that development and commute for 2 hours to get to a place of work in a central business district, for example. So I think we need to focus on you know, all of those good things which come from those type of developments, whether it be flexibility, connectivity, yeah, you know, I've covered a lot of them already, but it's a model that globally is being focused on for very good reason, and because it caters for a whole demographic. That's really what I'm trying to say.
Indeed. And also, Dr. Mubarak, sorry.
So we skittered around the point there, but the price point is absolutely integral to this.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about a large age range with millennials and other newer generations. But there's not always a disposable income. So we've seen a huge development in the design of particularly residential in the Abu Dhabi market over the last few years. You look at some of the units which were designed, and maybe now still being delivered, but they were very large units, much larger than other significant cities around the world. Some of them, well, most of the more recent projects that have been announced have been much, much smaller in scale. So the price point has been tailored by reducing the scale of the apartment to fit in with people's budgets. The salaries, the salary growth, the bonuses and so forth haven't been the same as they were going back to sort of 2007-8, and therefore people have had to reduce and look. So to create those environments, those mixed-use communities, yes, you need it to spread across the full demographic, but you also have to really focus on the price point, and that's not rate per square foot. That's what the top line number is.
Capital value. Completely agree. I'm going to come back to that point. Just going back slightly in terms of all the different requirements. Dr. Marek touched on it earlier in terms of alternative assets such as education, but I think wellness will be a very, very important factor playing part. Right now in the UAE, I think the above 55 population is something along the lines of 4.9%. Not saying 55 and higher is older in any circumstance, but in the next 10 years alone, that will go to 13%, and it'll continue to go higher and higher. And in a region where, you know, care homes and so on aren't used, actually have integrated healthcare and integrated education, particularly long life learning, will be very important. Coming on to Peter's point, and this is a question for the panel, in the event and where affordability becomes a much more constrained issue, what about the private rented sector, the build to rent sector? Do you think this is something that could take off here rather than purely looking at products which are built to sell, which is something which has historically been the norm here?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, I mean, I can only reference, excuse me, what's happening, for example, in the UK at the moment, where the build-to-rent market is something that's really starting to become of interest. I'm not sure how to comment for this market. I know, those build-to-rent projects, say a development of, say, 300, 400, 500 units will be delivered where there's, very, very strong metrics in terms of, population growth and job creation and all the rest of it. And then you'll have a fund which will come in and effectively buy that asset because they know, they're going to be able to rent out all of those units. And it's a very, very different model. And I know it's only just starting to gain some traction in very developed real estate markets like the UK. So I don't know, maybe now's not the right time here, but in due course, yes, for sure.
But I think the return in Abu Dhabi city, let's say, it's higher than the average of any city in the world.
Yes, the ROI, yeah, it is.
But I mean,
The prices are not very higher compared to the other world, or is the rent is higher?
No, I mean yields. If you look at yields for units, yes, they're very attractive. Very attractive. I mean, you might be looking at anything like 4% in the UK, 5%. If you're lucky, you can be looking at 7 or 8 here. But I'm not. Yeah, probably not the right person to comment on how the build to rent model for a building which is going to be owned by.
I'm actually going to not disagree as such, but if you look at the Abu Dhabi market at the moment, the overwhelming quantity of stock is actually on a build-to-rent basis. All of the towers on Abu Dhabi Island have been built. Yes, the land was given.
Out of the developers, the major developers, that's the model, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure that there will be. In order to develop at the moment, you cannot secure the pre-sales that you were able to in the past, and so developers may have to look at that exit. But it's not new to them. The whole of Abu Dhabi Island has been built on a build-to-rent basis. A lot of what you see on Raha Beach being built at the moment is land which was taken from owners in downtown Abu Dhabi to partially regenerate that, clear out the middle of the city blocks, and being now built using government money, government loans to individuals. Part of that is to replace the income streams which there had been from the older buildings downtown. So it's not new as a concept, and certainly in the past, developers in this part of the world have had more of a focus on sort of cash-on-cash return rather than IRR. And if you're looking at cash-on-cash return, it allows you to look more at a long-term hold.
Gentlemen, I think we are about out of time, but we do have a few minutes left for questions. Do we have any questions from the audience at all? Yes, just the front here and then one behind as well.
Thank you. My name is Fuad. I heard some point raised by Nigel. It's about taking a block inside the island and try to see about redesign something. Am I right about that? This is what one of.
Yes.
Okay, this is a very interesting idea, but I think we have to go a step back to see these blocks. Most of the building inside the island are 20, 25 years, and even 30 years old building. Most of them are in acceptable status and good status. But what about, for example, we heard a lot of things proposed in the market that there is classification of the building there. For example, this is for family, this is for shared family, this is for bachelor, even to classified area inside the island. And the monitor of facility and utilities inside all these buildings, especially the safety measure inside all the towers that His Excellency Dr. Mubarak, he said. Most of the tower, any monitor precaution, any monitor procedure there. This is, I think, we have to tackle this before going to this great idea and see the impact of redesign, taking some redesign steps inside one block. So I don't know if any Dr. Mubarak, any classification for the building for these areas for inside the island, because we are seeing a lot of building share family, a lot of building with some bachelor inside, so it's not under control now, I think. Yeah, any legislation in this, any regulation in this area?
From what we see in the newspaper, there is a lot of, well, let's say, regulation coming from the municipality and from civil defense. And I think they have a lot of things to take care of any risk associated with the behavior or with the, let's say, safety, general safety. I think there is a lot of visit, from what I heard, the civil defense is doing to the old building and the new building, and to secure the safety. In general, Abu Dhabi is one of the safest city in the world, so it's not like, compared with other city, I think it's one of the safest on earth. That means there is other people play roles, maybe we don't see it, but it's there, and the result is evidence of that.
Hello, my name is Walid Al-Mriak from Provis. My question is for Dr. Mubarak. Do you think that Abu Dhabi needs more affordable development, new affordable developments with better amenities, such as swimming pools, sauna, and better amenities?
I believe every city in the world has its own standard of cost, and Abu Dhabi considered in the region one of the highest income, and it should somehow logically associated with the cost. So if you are living in a good city, I believe it will be a little bit higher cost than a city less fortunate. So I assume it's always there is a balance between cost and income. And I think there is a balance there in Abu Dhabi, let's say.
Don't you think it would have a better impact on investments?
Again?
Especially, do you think that if we have more affordable housing developments within Abu Dhabi, it would attract more investments and investors?
I think Abu Dhabi now has a lot of supply, and everybody noticed those days there is, let's say, the price is going down, and the owner, they consider it dramatically, and the other side, they consider it still high. So always there is a balance between supply and demand. And whenever there is, let's say, a lot more supply, the prices will go down more than now.
I think your point is correct in that there will be a set amount of demand for affordable developments, and that's required to ensure that the city develops properly and it caters to the broad range of income. So I think you are right in saying that.
I think each building it's different from another. Like there is old buildings, medium age, new one. different facilities. Each one has its own criteria and is its own.
Especially with the freehold now, a lot of investors can like own.
I think there was a rule that 20% of each project to be to the lower income. But whoever afford it, he is not low income. If you own a unit in Ireland, it should not be, sure it will not be cheap, even if you describe it low income housing.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sunil Gomes. I'm a real estate developer here in the UAE. I've been here since 2002. My question is more macro than it is micro, which is in the last 17 years I've seen 2 economic cycles since I've been here. And these events held by Cityscape are extraordinarily interesting for no other reason than it's the only time of the year that people working in the real estate development field can actually get together and have a debate about something. My question to you all is, isn't it time that the real estate industry within the UAE or the various Emirates actually get together and form their own real estate association so we can discuss the problems amongst ourselves without having it to be organized by Cityscape, bring those problems, lobby the government and say, these are the issues that we're facing in planning, these are the issues that we're facing in sustainability. Because I sit here today, and I've done this now for 13 or 14 years of coming to Cityscape events. After the event, we all exchange business cards. There's no notes issued, there's no copies of the meetings prepared. Everybody forgets what's ever been discussed here until we go along to the next coffee morning. And I think it's wonderful that we do this, but there's actually no intrinsic long-term value from doing this unless the industry itself gets together. And instead of us relying on the government bodies to help us, we should start helping ourselves. I mean, it's wonderful that Mr. Mubarak Omaru is here and he provides great government insight for us, but what are we doing for ourselves? Comment, please.
I think the nature of the market here is that, I mean, 17 years in the UAE, most people are probably slightly more transient than that, and therefore investing, setting up that sort of body, perhaps isn't on their first agenda. I mean, certainly here in Abu Dhabi, there is still a real estate group which discusses it. It's probably more social than.
But those groups tend to be more government-led and more government commerce organized. They're not the industry themselves talking to other industry participants. I mean, we literally, in 17 years, we either rely to the Cityscape conference or the Cityscape breakfast to get together. And yet, nothing comes out of it for ourselves. We literally rely on government to help us.
I agree. I mean, certainly in Abu Dhabi specifically, I've been involved in a real estate group which has been discussing some of the issues, we say, with the 2015 law, which impacted brokers particularly. And so the group was discussing, and it was involved in lobbying Abu Dhabi Judicial Department. I agree with you, though, that it could be much better organised and could debate on a much more formal basis a lot more points to lobby government.
Thank you.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I would like to thank our panelists. If you could join me in thanking our panelists for all their great insights today they had. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.
Before we finish, when we speak about Abu Dhabi and we speak about real estate and investing in real estate usually it's like long-term investment, and when you invest in a city you have to have a faith in the city. Abu Dhabi has a lot of wealth, gas, oil. Abu Dhabi has a lot of sovereign fund, which support it financially. So Abu Dhabi is a safe game for whoever would like to invest in a real estate.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Gentlemen. Thank you.